Hey beekeepers, Hive Doctor here. Now that we're in early spring and most of our days are in the 60s average, we still have like kind of some cool nights. I want to get some feed on my bees, and I usually feed them with Boardman feeders from the back of my hives, but I don't feel like doing that. I want to use a method that I learned from commercial beekeepers in Florida, and that's an open feeding method, and I'm going to just kind of bring you along and show you how I do that today, so stick around. So as you guys can see, I've already got my stuff ready and set up here. What I've got is, I've got 5 gallons of warm water already in this tote. This tote is something I'll explain in a minute. So what I've got is 5 gallons of water already in this feeding tote, and I'll explain the details of this tote in a second. And I've got 4 more gallons for a total of 9 gallons, and that's so that I can feed the equivalent of a 1-to-1 sugar syrup for my bees. I've got 75 pounds of sugar over here that we're going to dump in here and mix today. As you can see, I've got my apiary in the back, my primary one that's closest to home, and I'm about 50 feet from them. Whenever you open feed, it's important to kind of do it away from the bees, just as a way to entice them to leave the colony a little bit further instead of sitting it right next to one. Because if you've got one weak colony and you sit this feed next to it, they might transfer over. And even though the bees are not robby right now, I don't want to give them any reason to pick on any smaller, weaker colonies. So it's just a good practice that I like to do when I open feed, is to do it a little bit away from the bees. One of the things I have to consider though is right across the hill behind you is goats, and they have a ringleader. It is a donkey, and sometimes they get out and they come over here. I don't think they'll mess with this. It's not a big deal if they do. They certainly aren't going to turn it over, hopefully, but that's the only risk I've got. So let's go ahead and start putting this together. I'll explain my bucket here and kind of give you the pros and cons of what I like and what I don't like about open feeding. But what I've got here is something I brought from Florida with me. I've got 3 of these totes for open feeding, and it's one of those buckets that, like a molasses, came in for feeding cattle. I got permission from some of the owned property down in Florida where we had bees in their pasture. When these were empty, they weren't going to reuse them, so I snagged 4 of them total. Now I'm down to 3. I like these because when you open feed, you're kind of taking the risk of it raining and filling your feed with water, from the sky. It's diluting your sugar syrup. The difference between the way I'm doing it now though here in Georgia versus the way I learned it from the commercial beekeepers in Florida is that they would use 55-gallon drums, and it was full of high fructose corn syrup, which you guys know I'm not a fan of, and there was no top. We could kind of sort of make one, but it didn't work out too well. This one I've made, this lid snaps on pretty securely, and I just went around and drilled like, I don't know, 1.25 inch holes all around this for the bees to be able to come and go from. In fact, I'll bring you closer so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so here you can see I've got like pairs of holes drilled all around. So I put a pair on each side, and then in between those I put single holes, so there's plenty for the bees to come and go through. And as you see, I've got the rest of what I need. Got my sugar, I've got some pine straw in the back. I'll show you why I've got that, and this styrofoam cooler lid. But I feel it important to know if you ever decide to open feed, one of the biggest negatives about it is that a lot of bees can drown if you don't take proper measures, because it's open feed. That's why it's called open feeding. I'm not feeding each individual colony with a jar or an in-hive feeder where they're not as likely to drown. This, you have to take certain measures to make sure that you minimize the drowning, because it's spring, right? You don't ever want to drown your bees to drown, but especially in the spring, if you got any small colonies that barely made it through winter, this is the time where you want them to build up and expand and grow. So I'll show you what I do to keep my bees from drowning way more successfully than we did in Florida when we were using the 55-gallon drums. We still tried, but I found like a little tip and trick that I didn't use down there that I do use here, and I'm going to share that today. Let's go ahead and get started mixing up this sugar. So I've already got 5 gallons of water in here, and it's warm to just kind of help make the mixing a little easier. This sugar is going to cool it off, so it's only partially helpful. But the reason I put water in here first is it makes mixing the sugar easier. None of this gets stuck like in a pocket down at the bottom. There's one. Now I haven't open fed my bees in a while, so I kind of look forward to just doing it this way. It's pretty easy. I don't have to fill any individual containers. But to note, this is not something I could do later in the year when the bees get more robby. So like during a dearth, I would not open feed. That's a bad idea, because then you're just inciting more robbing. Whenever the bees have got the smell of something sweet and it's open like this, like in open feeding, it's not a good idea when it's robbing season. Yep. Told you there was a donkey. All right, so I've got 75 pounds of sugar in here, 5 gallons of water. Let's put the last 4 gallons. It's not an exact science. I like doing this because it helps mix that sugar up a little bit too. And I even have room for more if I wanted to. Probably another bag plus 3 more gallons would get this a lot closer to the holes here. But right now I'm at this level. So right there you can see. The next step is to stir that up really well in stages. I'll stir it once, let it settle for a minute, stir it again, let it settle to where eventually there is no settling on the bottom, or at least just a little bit. And you'll be able to tell because the sugar syrup is very clear. I can see all the way to the bottom of the bucket. Now, I was pretty prepared for this job, but one thing I did forget was to bring like a thin board, a long board that I like to use to just stir this nice and even while I'm standing up. That's one thing I didn't bring, so I'm gonna have to improvise and find a stick here in the woods. Here's an old rotten fence post. This will work. So I just drag it to me like this. It keeps down the splashes so I don't get so sticky. And you can feel when you're stirring how much sugar is in the bottom of the tote. And it doesn't matter if like sticks and little pieces of bark could get in there, because the bees are just gonna lick all the sugar syrup out and leave all that stuff behind. It's not like it contaminates the sugar syrup in any way. So I'm gonna go ahead and put you guys on pause, finish stirring this, bring you back and show you how to set this up to where you minimize bees drowning in the syrup. Okay, here we go. This is done being stirred. I've got a lot of it dissolved, a lot of the sugar. You see little pieces of bark in there. Like I said, that's not a big deal at all. That'll be then in there after the bees clean this out. In fact, in Florida, when we use 55-gallon drums, we would fill it about this far from the top. And within a day, sometimes 5, depending on the strength of the hives and the time of year, they would empty out a 55-gallon drum. It was just astonishing how fast bees can move this stuff from a bucket to their colonies. All right, so here's my secret for helping bees not drown. I've got this cooler lid. It's just styrofoam, which you know is light and it floats. I like this because it's the perfect size to go down in this bucket. And I don't just put it on top. I submerge it just a little bit to where syrup comes up on this lip. There's a little bit of air underneath this lid, and the more air I get rid of, the more likely there is for there to be syrup coming up around this rim. Now, that's exactly how I want it. The bees will come in these holes. They'll crawl across the pine straw. I'll show you how I put that in there in a second. And they'll just line up all along the styrofoam here and lick this up without having to drown. And this gives them a way to the syrup, but able to get in and out without drowning in this moat. So I will actually pack this around the styrofoam, and the bees are small. They can crawl in and around all of this and get their tongues to the syrup. That's not a problem. It's not a worry. Now I've got this lid kind of tight. I like it that way. The bees, as they come in the holes here, as you can see, they'll crawl down, they'll crawl across these needles, they'll lick it up, and before you know it, this will be empty. And I won't have any drowned bees in it. So that's pretty much it for setting this up. I could fill a little bit more, like I said, but this is going to be plenty. My colonies are just right there. In fact, probably a few of them will start to sniff this out this evening. We're really close to sundown, so it's likely that they'll hit this a lot harder first thing tomorrow when it's warm enough. Now all I have to do is snap this lid down. And like if I really was worried about Mr. Donkey over there coming and being curious and tipping this over, I could put a cinder block on top of this just as an extra guard against that. Now it's just time to clean this stuff up, head home. I even brought this strap. I wonder if it'll keep this tight. It's probably too long. Yeah, this strap, this bungee's too long, so I won't use that. And in the meantime, I will keep track of this and see how quickly these colonies take it down. Let you guys know how fast they did it. I have open fed in the spring before, here in Georgia, when I first started keeping bees up here, and I would make syrup just like you saw, and we had so much incoming nectar from maple and a few other sources that they ignored the sugar syrup completely. I was pretty surprised. They wouldn't touch it for about a week, and I think that was after a rain, so you know, sometimes blossoms can get washed out, but it's nice because this lid will keep this from becoming diluted from any rain, which I believe we have in the forecast. So I can go home and feel good knowing that this will be okay. And this would also be a great time to put in your Honey Bee Healthy when you're stirring up that sugar syrup and getting that fed into your bees after a long cold winter. All right, so this is what I like to see whenever the bees find interest in my open feeding bucket nearby. Got a lot of action coming in and out of this. I've definitely seen a heavier traffic coming and going. A lot of bees here at these holes coming up and kind of grooming themselves before they take off for home because they're sticky from the syrup. It actually took a few days for them to really start to get on this because we've got so much natural incoming nectar right now that they were just ignoring it. So I'm sure you guys have heard when there's natural sources, they love to go to that first and they'll ignore this stuff until they feel like it. So I'm going to pop the lid on this so we can see a little bit more about what's going on inside. When I do that, you know, it kind of shakes the whole thing. It's going to disturb the bees and they'll take flight, but we'll just look and see what's left. All right, so a lot of bees crawling down in between the pine straw. This side's got a little bit less because the longer this stuff sits in the syrup, it starts to become saturated and it will sink. So I see a few bees in here that need some help. So I'm going to push this pine straw in a little bit deeper to give them something to crawl onto. They're mostly coming over here because there's more available than having to crawl through all this thick stuff. So I'm going to push this down as well. Push this lid down. There's no more syrup on the edge, so this will help give them easier access. And of course, when they're tanked up, they crawl up this sticky wall, head out of these holes. I've seen this so busy once, like all this sticky will eventually turn into white, and you'll see sugar granules on the edges of these holes where they exit. And as you can tell, they can grip the inside of this bucket quite well. It's not like they're struggling to get out. Now I don't want to squash any bees here on the edge, so I'm going to bump this make them take flight a little bit, and then slowly bring this over, snap it into position. And that's pretty much the gist of it. Like I said, I've got 3 of these, and it doesn't have to be a bucket like this, but I like this because whatever kind of plastic this is made of, it really withstands the UV light. So it has not even shown the slightest bit of deterioration in the years I've been using this. I love open feeding with these. It's easier than having to fill a bunch of individual jars. It's just one way I like to do it. You could do this with 5-gallon buckets, just about anything you get creative with. Just remember, you gotta have something inside to minimize their drowning, things that float. Nothing like the sound of buzzing bees on a warm day. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I appreciate everyone joining me today. I'll see you guys in the next video.